Hello and welcome to the second episode of Opportunity Canada Critical Minerals, a series made in partnership between the Wall Street Journal Custom Content team and Invest in Canada. I'm Aisha Spears, an executive editor at The Trust at the Wall Street Journal, and I'm thrilled to be here to dive deeper into Canada's mining ecosystem and sustainable principles. Today, I'm joined by Pierre Gratton, President and CEO of the Mining Association of Canada, who has spent his career working across the country's mining sector, championing, amongst other things, a focus on sustainable development. Pierre, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the current state of the mining sector in Canada, particularly in terms of the mining companies' ESG practices?
I think the Canadian mining sector has been leading the world in many respects when it comes to sustainability performance or ESG as we now frame it today. Here in Canada, we pioneered a program called Towards Sustainable Mining, launched in 2004. It was the first site-level performance measurement system in the mining sector anywhere. Fast forward to today, and there are others. But we were the original, and it was really a collective commitment by our members here in Canada saying we need to hold ourselves to account for our performance. But not only that, we also need to put in place a system that helps drive performance improvement over time, that helps us be better and helps us keep on top of emerging expectations. Now, at that time in 2004, we weren't so concerned with investor expectations because at that time investors weren't thinking too much about this. We were more concerned about the concerns of our local communities, of our Indigenous partners, of our governments. But today, ESG and the investor focus looms much larger, and it's also another factor that TSM really focuses a lot of attention on.
How are companies here, I want to get stuck into TSM a bit later on, but how are they adapting and prioritizing these goals now, these considerations, while also remaining competitive at a global level?
Well, I think that our companies recognized early on that performing well across social and environmental aspects was good business. If you manage your environmental responsibilities seriously and competently, you would have fewer fines, you would have fewer troubles with authorities, you would have fewer criticisms from civil society. But also, by being a company that managed those aspects well, you were going to be a well-managed company. Just by definition. And a well-managed company also manages its business better. To say that all our members were in that place when we started is an exaggeration, but I think there were enough leaders at the time that recognized that it was good business to be good environmental stewards and socially responsible actors. And I think today it's pretty widely accepted that is the case. And so really, I don't think you get too many arguments from our members that this just makes good business.
We often hear when we're talking about sustainability across all sectors that mindset shift is one of the biggest things to overcome. But a core, tool in being able to do that is innovation. And Canada is a highly innovative country. What role does innovation play when it comes to this sort of transition in the mining sector?
Innovation is in some ways is challenging for the mining sector, to be honest, because it's so capital intensive that when you build a mine, you're purchasing equipment and putting in place infrastructure that is designed to last for a long time, for many years. The cost of innovating constantly, if it means replacing stuff you've just bought that's really expensive, can be challenging. But at the same time, because it's so capital intensive, you're always looking for ways to do things better. So you're certainly seeing huge movement in our sector around automation. You'll see, significant progress around environmental stewardship, better ways to manage the environment. The other thing that I think is a bit of an emerging Canadian success story is in the space of climate change. And, to some credit, this speaks to the success of Canadian public policy. Putting a price on carbon has motivated our sectors to be among the leading adopters of clean energy technologies. You take Agnico Eagle in Val-d'Or, the entire wall of their mill is solar powered. We have 2 mines that have installed trolley assist vehicles where you're only using diesel on the way down. You use electric on the way up. And underground mines, the newest underground mines in Canada are fully electric. And frankly, I think the future of underground mining is to be fully electric. I'd be surprised if we see a new underground mine built in Canada that isn't fully electric going forward. So we've seen a real pull by the industry to electrify and decarbonize, which is also really good because, of course, we also produce the metals that are necessary for electrification and decarbonization. So it's important that we walk the walk and not just supply the materials others need.
Can you talk us through the key kind of objectives and principles of TSM and why it's so important?
Yeah. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, TSM was in the first instance about a collective interest by the industry to improve performance. In part, the motivation was how do we improve how Canadians view our sector? And there was an acknowledgement that the best way to improve their impressions of mining is to improve how we operate and to do a better job of it. And so from that sort of thinking, TSM was born. TSM has a number of features, but core to TSM are a series of what we call 9 different protocols, 9 different performance chapters focusing on issues like biodiversity conservation, climate change, safety and health of workers, Indigenous and community engagement, those sorts of issues, water management, tailings management. And what happens is every year, every mine site does an evaluation of their performance, a self-assessment of their performance against specific performance indicators in each of those chapters, and they give themselves a grade. The indicators are based on a scoring system, a 5-level scoring system from CBA, AA to AAA. Every year they give themselves a letter grade for 34 performance indicators, and every 3 years that performance is independently assured by an outside auditor. And all of those results are published. So the industry can show their communities, investors, customers, how they're performing against each of these benchmark areas. And we can also show how our performance is improving over time by sort of tracking how grades are getting better over time. And also the industry can learn from one another. They can see who's doing well in one area and learn from them. And it's fostered a lot of that kind of collaboration and peer support. Another really important feature of TSM, which is unique among all of the systems worldwide that have since emerged around mining, is there's a requirement that each participating TSM partner establish a multi-stakeholder advisory panel. So in Canada, we've had a panel now in existence for 20 years. It includes representatives from Canada's 3 Indigenous peoples, the Métis, Inuit, and First Nations. We've got environmental NGOs. We've got the investor community. We've got organized labor. We've got community-level representatives. And this panel's role is really to challenge the industry, to advise the industry, to help hold the industry to account. And it also just really helps our industry stay on top of emerging issues and stay connected to civil society, which is so important in the ESG space. I often describe like the performance indicators drive performance. The panel helps drive cultural change. And I think it's really been successful at making Canada's mining sector more open, more transparent. I think it's one of the most transparent sectors in the Canadian economy. Just recently, Fasken's had a report that showed public reporting across ESG metrics across sectors, and mining was the highest of all those that they rated. And I think TSM really explains a lot of that. We've been doing this for so long, we've gotten so comfortable with it. We're a very transparent sector here in Canada. I'll be honest, we now have partners in other parts of the world. And we've met with other mining associations in other parts of the world that have not yet adopted TSM. And you can see cultural differences. You can see a sector that has not gone through the transition we have gone through yet, that isn't quite as open, isn't quite as transparent. But what TSM does with its system is it helps bring you there. And so TSM is now helping to raise the bar and change the culture of mining all over the world.
Thinking about investors, you mentioned them a little bit with regards to TSM. How does it help them? What does it do in terms of making investment attractive? The traceability, the transparency you mentioned. When you're going around the world, obviously you're talking to other mining associations, but I'm assuming you're also talking to investors.
Yes.
What do they want to know about TSM, and what is it they're most excited about when you tell them about it?
I think what TSM offers them is very concrete data. It's if they want to know how a particular company and a particular mine, I mean, we provide a lot of granular detail, is managing issues like climate change, which is very front and center, or biodiversity, which is even sort of more topical in some ways now since the Montreal conference. They can go onto our website and see very clearly if that particular mine is doing a good job or not, and what progress they're making over time. They could also sort of have a look at our sector overall and see how we're performing. And I think it can give them quite a bit of comfort in terms of Canadian mining sector performance across the most important ESG variables that they're interested in. I mean, a real challenge often for investors is knowing where to look. And so part of our challenge, of course, is to make them more and more aware that this exists. The Canadian investors are quite aware now, but getting beyond Canada into some of the bigger sort of international firms is sort of top of our list, and we're making some progress, but it's a big challenge because it's a big planet.
You've got 20 years of data, which in your industry is probably very rare to have that amount of data,
Very
especially
rare.
within the context of ESG.
Especially such granular detail. I don't think, frankly, no other standard in mining offers what we offer. Nowhere close, because none of the other standards have our longevity.
Yeah. I mean, traceability is something you've mentioned a couple of times here. We know that that's incredibly important, especially when we're sort of ensuring that critical minerals promote sort of high ESG practices in mining. Tell us a little bit about Canada's record there and success when it comes to traceability and transparency.
Traceability in mining is hard. When you think about forestry, for example, let me just compare a sector. It is much easier to trace the product from a tree to the customer. There aren't as many steps along the way before you go to your hardware store and buy your lumber, which can have, an FSC certified mark on it. And so if someone is concerned about where the tree where the wood came from, they can look for that logo. In mining, you go from a mine to a mill to a smelter to a refiner to a semi-manufacturing to manufacturing to the automobile to the customer. And along that way, different metals have been mixed from all over the world. And so it's very hard to say that this automobile was sourced with 100% responsibly mined material. Very challenging in our sector. But there's increasing push to try to do that. We've been actually piloting with one of our member companies a project with the BC government using blockchain technology to actually try to see the extent to which we can push that traceability a bit further. And certainly, depending on the products, some products, the link between mine to customer is shorter than others. Lithium is much shorter than some other products. And consequently, actually, we're starting to feel more pressure from some parts of some of our customers. The automotive sector in particular is becoming much more aggressive in their expectations around responsible mining. And they're going, sort of upstream to try to apply pressure.
It's clear that the sort of stability and transparency with which Canada's mining sector operates is setting a standard really for the rest of the world. Looking ahead, what do you see as the future for ESG practices here in Canadian mining?
Oh, it's not going away. I mean, there's been some talk, right? You've had the sort of anti-ESG movements predominantly in the United States. I don't see that really taking hold. There may be some pushback. It may intensify if the presidency changes in the U.S. for a period, but it's not going to go anywhere. I mean, ESG is the newest framing of the issue, but sustainability of performance has been around for 20, 30 years, just becoming more and more sophisticated. And regardless of who may occupy the White House, the investor community around the world is going to insist on certain benchmarks. And so I don't think it's at any risk of going away. It's only going to continue to sharpen. Certain issues do sort of ebb and flow in terms of priority. Depending, it can be influenced by major incidents. For example, tailings was very front and center when you had those major disasters in Brazil. But I think climate change and biodiversity conservation today are going to stay front and center for many years to come, and no one is going to be able to get away with dodging that, regardless of who occupies what office. I don't think there's any way around it.
When you're traveling around the world, you're meeting partners. What do they ask you about how they can get to where Canada is today? What's the sort of biggest challenge, biggest hurdle that they face? One
of Canada's real strategic advantages is our energy grid. 83% of our energy is clean or non-emitting. That's a huge advantage, and it's only going to get better. In a world fighting climate change, one of the things we like to say is one of the best ways to fight climate change is to buy from Canada, because you're buying some of the lowest carbon content metal in the world with some of the highest ESG practices you'll find anywhere. So what do other countries envy? They envy that. I think what I also hear too is they envy the breadth and depth of Canada's mining sector, because we have much more than mines. We have mines, we have smelters, we have refiners, but we have an enormous supply sector. We have a very sophisticated financial sector that understands mining. We have government regulators that know how to regulate mining. We have a very informed civil society that knows how to hold the industry to account, but in a way that is sophisticated and constructive most of the time. I think that's an envy of the world. We talk about, why should U.S. investors be interested in Canada? There's often the perception that it can take a long time to approve mines in Canada. I'm not going to dispute that. Our own Minister of Natural Resources has said so. Our Minister of Environment has said so. But there's a saying in our industry which holds true. Canada may be one of the more demanding places to permit a mine in the world, but it's one of the best places to operate a mine in the world. There is no risk of expropriation. What we've seen in Panama with one of the world's most important copper mines would never happen here. Our tax and regulatory and royalty system rarely changes. It's stable. They undergo periodic reviews from time to time, but basically, what you're going to pay. It's fixed for everyone. You don't have individual contracts per mine. It applies equally across the board. It's fully transparent. People can understand. Investors can understand clearly what's at play. And we're a country of law and order. We have a very educated workforce, and we have very good regulations. So those are some of the advantages that I think Canada has that American investors should. Yeah, you might have to be a little patient, but once you've made that investment, that mine is going to last with no risk to the investor for life of mine. And as we know from Canadian geology, a mine may open with a mine life of 15 years and still be operating 100 years later because it just keeps giving. That's the advantage of Canada, I think.
There's no better place to end than that. That was brilliant, Pierre. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. This has been the second episode of a 3-part series called Opportunity Canada Critical Minerals, a series made in partnership between the Wall Street Journal Custom Content team and Invest in Canada. If you missed our first episode where we spoke to Laurel Broughton, please look back and take a listen to that. And join us again in a couple of weeks where we'll have a fascinating discussion diving deeper into the mining ecosystem and the critical minerals supply chain.